Hello, everyone. My name is Art Gruenberger. I'm here with Puppet Art Theater Company, and I'm thrilled to be here today. We are going to be having a conversation with the creative team behind a project that was one of my favorite projects to be a part of, a little shadow film called The Little Dragon, shot for the Bose Corporation. So we are going to start in just a moment. We are glad to have you all here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We'll start.
Once, long ago.
Welcome again. My name is Art Gruenberger. Thrilled to be here with you guys. So glad so many of you guys are showing up to watch this as well. We are going to have some of the producers, the director of photography, puppet designers, puppet builders, puppeteers, and of course, the author of The Little Dragon, Jay O'Callahan, all as guests with us today to have a conversation about this short little 16-minute film that was very impactful to my life and certainly impactful to lots of people that got to see it. So before I get into too deep, there's a few housekeeping things. You'll see a little scrolling thing down there. It won't be scrolling there the entire time, but due to COVID-19, a lot of puppet artists are out of work right now. And so we thought, we're going to have this conversation, and lots of puppeteers were involved. And I'm fortunate to be working despite COVID-19, but there are lots of live puppet artists that are not. So if you can, please donate to the little website that is tickering by there. It is a direct relief fund for puppet artists put up by Puppeteers of America, a very kind thing that they are doing. So please feel free to donate to that. And we have a matching grant. We have an anonymous $200 donation. So if you are going to donate, type in the chat box down below that you're going to donate, how much you're going to donate, and we will match that amount up to $200 with the anonymous donation. So please do that if you can. If you can't, just hang out with us, and we're going to have some fun today. So I get to introduce the puppetry director of The Little Dragon. She and we've been friends since I think 1996, when I met her at the O'Neill Puppetry Conference, where Larry Reed of Shadowlight Theater was doing a show called The Wild Party. Is it The Wild Party, Wendy? I can see you not. Yeah, The Wild Party. And that's where Wendy and I met. And I became fascinated with this style of puppetry, large movie-sized screen style puppetry. So won't you please help me welcome Wendy Morton. Yay, Wendy. Hi. Wendy.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you for coming, everybody. This is so great that Art has put this together, and we have a reunion with all of our buddies that work together on this project that we all hold so dear to our hearts.
Yeah, and hopefully I know there's been a few copies of the video floating around, and we were allowed to sort of post it for a little while leading up to this. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at the 16-minute video. If you have, feel free to type into the comments so that we know that we're there. We see a bunch of people. Hi, Mark. Good to see you there. Connor is here as well. Randall McGee, of course, and Brian Carson. Good to see you guys all here. And Amy Kathleen, who is the daughter of Stephen, he did the music for The Little Dragon, which it's Bob, is that right? I can see you on the screen, Bob. Give me a nod. Yeah, that's right. Excellent. Amy, it's so glad to see you here. It's great to have so many people here. So Wendy, I have like 3 projects that I've done in my life that are like the pinnacle, and Little Dragon is one of those projects that for me, I just feel so proud that I got to be a part of. I mean, it's just, as I was like editing little clips of the video, I was bawling the entire time, because this story for me, it's all of the elements that came together in the film were absolutely incredible. Is it where on your rankings is this project for you?
Well, on the top, of course. It was just really a wonderful opportunity to be able to express something in shadows in such a totally charming story and have all of the support of the Bose team behind us doing it, plus original music and live musicians, and just really a dream come true.
Nice. Now, before we get too deep in, I want to bring in Bob, because Bob was the executive producer. So let me read just a little intro from Bob. His resume is quite impressive. So Bob was responsible for creating most of Bose Corporation's audiovisual product demonstration between 1972 and 2008. In 1999, he was appointed a Bose Fellow. So won't you please help me welcome Bob Petrucci. Hi, Bob. How are you, sir?
Fine, thanks. How's everybody?
Good. It's really good to thank you so much for being with us here today. So you can see that I'm wearing Bose headphones right now.
Excellent.
Like, of course, I love Bose products for sure, because they're incredible. But the fact that Bose was willing to do a project like the Little Dragon, and if I'm remembering correctly, you guys had just come off doing a project with flamenco dancers, right?
That's correct.
Like, what was the point of these films for Bose?
Well, at the time, we had stores all around the world where people could come and experience the difference that a Bose product made. And so we would generally create our own demonstration material. And the flamenco project that we did just before the Little Dragon, the poor flamenco dancers, who came, of course, from Spain, we shot in Nova Scotia in the middle of the winter. And we produced a number of very short little demonstration clips that played a role in the proper point in the show.
And so this was your job at Bose, was to go in and create all of these things to sort of show off the Bose products then?
Yes.
Gotcha. And then, so you go from flamenco dancers to large-scale shadow puppetry. What were you thinking?
Well, at this particular time, Bose had just developed a new home theater system, and we needed a show to demonstrate that. And unlike many earlier shows, which were basically about music, because Bose was basically an audio company, here we had a home theater application which involved storytelling. And I was wondering how we might open it. We had a tradition with our music shows that we would open by talking about the importance of music in life and how it touched people, because our job at Bose was to provide a higher fidelity path to experience the music through. And so I was wondering, how could we start with something that would help people get into the importance of storytelling in life and theater in life. And while I was thinking about that, I came across a picture which I believe came from Indonesia of the traditional shadow puppet approach in Indonesia, which was, as I remember, there was a rural village, and everybody in town had come and was sitting in front of a makeshift screen, which was like a bed sheet stretched between a couple of trees, and behind the screen was with a handful of puppets and an oil lantern and a musician was the storyteller, and he was acting out the story with the puppets and whatever, and looking at the faces of the people in the audience really touched me. It seemed like such a wonderful illustration of the power of storytelling. So the next question in my mind was, did there exist in the world a westernized version of this? Because the Indonesian style would be too exotic for our audience. And so I did a little research, and I discovered there were various people practicing around the country doing this updated version with electric lights and big, huge screens. And I said, oh, wow, that is really cool. I think people would really be attracted by that. And so I needed to find someone to work with and kind of sent out the word and asked for people to send videotapes. You couldn't do that over the internet back then. And so I ended up with a stack of video cassettes and screened them. And the one that stood out and just touched me so deeply was Wendy's reel. And I think it was the puppets that she had helped design for the show Xanadu. Mm. And I thought they were so elegant, so stylish. I thought it'd be wonderful if we could work with her. So I got in touch with her and just to find out would she be interested potentially in a project, and she said sure. And do you want me to go on? And next, I guess.
I know you. There was a little back and forth because we were like, I know Wendy and I went into a little soap shop down in Point Richmond and set up a shower curtain screen, and she had built some of the puppets, and we started testing the puppets. And then for some reason, Bose was like got a little hesitant. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, we're kind of jumping ahead because we're already into puppets. We needed the story, so. At Bose, we had worked with Jay O'Callahan before. He's a very prominent storyteller in our area, and he worked with us on another show. And we got wonderful results, and we enjoyed working with him. So we contacted him, and he suggested several stories, and The Little Dragon is the one that we converged on. So, the stop and start happened a little later, I think. In my recollection, in fact, it wasn't my recollection. I had to go back and look at my records to remember how things proceeded. But we agreed to go forward. We developed, Steve Ruggieri, our music director, created the music. Newbar was already thinking about how to photograph it. The puppets were mostly built by that time. And possibly rehearsed to some extent with the shower curtain. Yes. And we were ready to get together. And then Dr. Bose called me up one day and said, I have this other urgent priority and I need you to stop whatever you're doing and work on this. And so my recollection of that is you had a highly motivated team. You remember it all these years later. That suddenly lost a lot of steam. You know, we had been planning to shoot, I think, in June or July, and we had to stop. My team had to stop and work on something else for 3 months. So we did that, and then we came back, and Wendy, I got the team all geared up again, and enthusiasm ready to go again, and then we discovered, I think this was November we were planning to shoot. And then we discovered that the fellow who had rented us the location didn't really have the authority to rent us the location. And it actually wasn't available in November when we had planned. So we had to put everything on hold again. So it wasn't until January of 2005 that finally the stars aligned and everybody came together in Waltham in this renovated mill building that we shot in and had a fabulous time.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to show just a little clip of our next guest, and then we're going to bring Jay O'Callahan on. So let me just show you just a little bit of Jay's work, and we'll bring Jay in.
Once, long ago, a little girl named Elizabeth was waiting at the edge of a forest. She was waiting for a famous storyteller, Monsieur La Flute. She heard the branches snapping, and then it was Monsieur La Flute, always dressed in forest green, had a feather in his hat. His cape was blowing in the wind, and in the lining of his cape there were 1,000 tiny pockets, and every pocket had a tiny book. Hello, Elizabeth. Here, take a book. Elizabeth read these words. Once there was a little dragon.
Welcome, Jay O'Callahan, storyteller and author extraordinaire. Hi, Jay. Welcome.
Thank you, Art. Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Excellent. So you were following along our conversation with Bob, and I got to tell you, like you're every time I've shared the video of the Little Dragon, the comment that I get is, "Oh, is that Jay O'Callahan narrated?" He's wonderful, so you're certainly a well-known commodity, and working with you was absolutely incredible. You were just a really grounding force. When we originally started working with Jay's voice, we had a recording that you did for us so we could practice with the puppets before we went back east to do the actual shoot. And so it felt like we had gotten to know you a little bit, or at least the characters. And then when we actually met you in person, we met this incredibly gentle and loving person. So it was best of both worlds. So thank you for that. Can you tell us a little bit about the story, The Little Dragon?
Yes. First, it's wonderful to see Bob and Wendy. It's such a wonderful treat to work with all of you in this project. The story came about when my daughter, who was 7 years old, Laura Elizabeth, had gone to sleep. No, my son had gone to sleep. So the story was going to be for Laura. And I had made up an imaginary kingdom called Artana. And my children were always in the stories. Well, since my son had gone to sleep, it would be just Laura. It was a summer evening. And what's important is that without this listener, there would be no story. I would never have sat down at a typewriter. The magic of a child, the wonder of the child is what I think drew the story out. So Laura it's bedtime. Hopefully I can entertain her. And I began, as I always begin the Artana stories, with once was a little girl named Elizabeth. She was going to the storyteller, Monsieur Le Flute, to get a story. Monsieur Le Flute had a cape with 1,000 tiny pockets. In every pocket there was a book. She took a book and read this story. Once there was a little dragon. And then she began to spin around and she went into the story. So I had begun the story. I had no idea where the story would go. But it went to a castle, a tower room, and telling the story, not knowing what's going to happen. So I'm listening to the story myself. And she sees what seems to be a dog. Not a dog, I mean dragon. And it turns out very quickly the dragon is a sad dragon because he's a captive there so that the king and the court can make fun of him. And she begins to play hide and seek because instinctively she knows the dragon has to find some fun. So they play it, he jumps around, it's good games, good games, good game. And he's coming to life. He's being paid attention to. Just as Laura Elizabeth paying attention to me. And then we see some sadness that he's made fun of. The king and the court come up and they say, breathe fire, and he can't, and they laugh. And she tries to cheer him up. And as I'm telling the story, then the dragon says this extraordinary thing that his father 1,000,000 years ago had to breathe fire all the way into the sun because the sun was turning blue, a crust of ice. You could do it. I cannot. I could never do it. So then, as I'm telling the story, can the dragon breathe fire? And if he can breathe fire, could he ever breathe fire all the way to the sun to break the crust of ice? So, of course, he did. And then, I'll tell you just a bit more. So then I began to think about this story that night, and I typed it up. Now, that's something I almost never did, but I loved the story. So then, as a storyteller, I loved rhythms. So one of the rhythms that would come back, good game, good game, good game. And then I wanted a court, and the court was lots of fun. The king says, here's the court, and in come the ne'er-do-wells with the very upmode smells, and the highs and the lows, and the do's and the does, and the cans and the cannots, and the roundheads and squareheads and the fatheads, and the play with language was fun. And so I did that, and then the drama of climbing. But this is all over a couple of months, because I can remember a friend saying, now, Elizabeth is afraid to jump across because she may fall hundreds of feet. And he said, why not have the dragon have her use her imagination? So suddenly it's not just Elizabeth helping the dragon is helping her. Imagine your wings, imagine you have wings, Elizabeth, you have wings. Shut your eyes, you can do it. And she does, and she jumps across. And I love that because here you have a dramatic, playful story about saving the world. But in a sense, the friendship of these two can save the world. And, that's a metaphor for what can happen. Never thought about that. But that second part was working with the story. That's my work, just as the puppeteers work and produce something. And then I began to tell it and have a wonderful time. It's such fun to drive off, not to my insurance company, because I don't have one, but to a school and to tell the little dragon and have the kids get up at the end and pick up an imaginary flute. So that's how it all began, as a bedtime story to my daughter, Elizabeth.
It's incredible. As I've been editing the videos just to show little clips, watching Elizabeth teach the dragon how to breathe fire and building up his confidence, and then seeing that echoed when she jumps over that chasm where the dragon is then doing the exact, that just teared me up. And what was beautiful about it in the film, Bob, was to have the element of the kids, like I think you said that from watching the Indonesian Shadows, having the element of those beautiful children, like on Jay's every word, yes. and just getting every aspect of the story too. Just incredible. Well, you guys, we're going to bring you back on in a little while. Thank you, Bob. You're going to come back. We'll talk a little bit when we have Newbard, the director of photography from this project, on. And Jay, if you wouldn't mind sticking around, people will likely have storyteller questions for you. Cindy is saying you are the most incredible storyteller. Thank you, Cindy, for the comment. I would not disagree with that at all. Thank you, guys. We're gonna now let Jay and Bob go, and we will have you guys back. Thank you guys so much, Wendy. I wish you wouldn't be such a chatterbox, but I'm glad you're here with me. We are going to talk to you a little bit, and I think you're going to actually do a little bit of puppet demo stuff, and we're also going to show some of the videos that we have of you and I trying out the puppets, and we're going to bring one of the builders on. So will you introduce her, please?
Sure. Well, just a little bit of background for the designing. I had 10 artists involved in helping to construct the puppets. There were roughly 75 puppets, I think, and different scenes as well. And at the time I was working for George Lucas on, I think it was episode 3. And there was a big crew there. And so I had some people that I could kind of drag in to help me work after hours or weekends. And so I set up a workshop in my garage, and people were working away in there. And also at the shop at ILM, we did some laser cutting of a couple of the main characters so that we could have them in different positions for different scenes. So one of the people that I brought in, not an ILM person, but a very talented artist, is Raven Caliana. She just does beautiful movement in her drawing, and she created some amazing scenery for the show. And so let's bring Raven in. And
hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm just curious about your art background first, Raven. And
Well,
then tell us about
I'm
working
drawing
on
little pictures since I was 3.
but no
Oh, well.
training really.
I mean, not exactly, not particularly. I was just always interested in art, and I did it obsessively, and so lots of practice equals, more skill, I guess. And yeah, so it was really an amazing experience to work with you, and it was so eye-opening to see the potential of shadow puppetry, because I'd never worked on a shadow puppet production before, and now I use it quite a lot in my work.
Yes.
So it's just so amazing to see your style and your amazing range of techniques. And I remember going to shadow puppet festivals in Germany with you, and how fun that was. Yeah.
Right, yes. The show had a life after this project that we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yes.
And I was going to say, Art and I originally met working with Larry Reed. He was using large-scale shadows on a big screen and combining that with puppets. You had people and puppets together on the same screen, which was fascinating to do. And then Leon Casapides did a show that I saw that was The Wizard of Oz. And he used an overhead projector for people and then puppets on the screen. And I thought, oh, you can do that with an overhead projector. That's much simpler than very elaborate electronic equipment and lighting that Larry was using. So that was sort of the basis for creating this story, to be able to combine both of those elements. And Raven made a beautiful mountain for us, and
And co-designed the 2 characters with you as well. Both
the characters.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how you designed the little dragon. Wendy was mentioning yesterday that it was just sort of a back and forth, and the character turned out just wonderfully. So how did that come about?
Well, I drew a little dragon character, but I think it had little spikes on its back. And then when I send it to Wendy, she's like, oh, like you saw the potential of it, but then you're like, well, it would be better if it had like more little rounded bumps on its back. And it was like, well, I totally agree. You're right. And you made it so much more friendly and cute.
Yeah, we passed that one back and forth, and Raven had the initial idea, and then we just kept adding little tweaks. Well, what if it had this? What if it had that? What if the eye looked like this?
Yeah.
And
did you guys run out of time? Did you finally say this is the one? This is like when was that moment when you figured out this?
Yeah, it arrived and it was done. It just looked really good. And then and Bob had some tweaks too. He was like, I want the face a little softer. So we decided we were going to put some feathers on his head, just to soften him a little bit. So all the different versions of him, if you can see, you have a little tufty, which is kind of cute and childlike as well.
Yeah. And his little ears. I love that you made his little ears move. It's so cute.
We have a little video of before I show the little test video that Wendy and I were playing around with. What can you talk about how many versions of the dragon you guys eventually had? Because there were dozens of puppets, right?
Yeah, quite a few. There were at least 10 versions of the dragon, from very large close-up face, like this guy here, and then teeny tiny ones that were off in the distance. There we go. Yeah.
So this little guy was laser cut, right?
Yes. Yeah. So
because you could see there's little. I mean, you could see on the shadow image back behind it that there are little cuts in that tiny little guy that are incredible.
Yeah, Pierre Marr over at ILM was laser cutting things for me so that I would have a range of different sizes and still keep the integrity of the look of the original character. So we did that with the dragon and a little bit with Elizabeth heads as well. Nice. the close-up dragon, sort of figuring out the mechanisms for what he needs to do in each of the scenes. And
Let's
I
take
have
a
a
look
guy
at
here I can show you.
Guy?
If you can see him. His ears can go up. And then I can move his mouth as well. Come back here. And then he also has an eyelid that will close.
Lovely. Let's look at that video. We'll be able to talk while we're looking at it as well. So this is the shower curtain in the soap factory that Wendy and I played around in, and this is that exact puppet you were just showing. It's got the ears. I mean, it's for a puppeteer, it is a dream to be able to have a puppet that can have so many expressions with just 3 strings that you're pulling. This was an interesting little moment. We thought at some point the dragon would smoke, I guess, is what we thought we could do. But the look of his eye looked like he was smoking something other than maybe dragon fire. Now he's surprised as well. One of the other puppets that is just incredible is this guy right here. Wendy, can you talk a little bit about how he's jointed? Because he and the smaller version of him are just incredible puppets.
Well, I had been doing all of my puppets Balinese style with one stick cutting up the middle of them and then adding moving parts onto that. But for the dragon, I just was looking at him and I thought, well, what if the middle part was free floating and the sticks were not on the middle part? And it just gave him this tremendous range. So it was a breakthrough for me. But then, of course, I took a workshop with Richard Bradshaw later and find out he's been doing that all along because it is 3-part 2-stick puppet. But it really gives the puppet so much more range. And here's art puppeteering in this little demonstration here. Was having so much fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a puppeteer's dream again, to be able to, because I've worked on productions too where we didn't get the puppets until maybe a week before, and we had like little stand-in things, but to be able to play with these guys long enough to really find what they could do as characters was just absolutely incredible. There he is.
Wendy, didn't you train in Indonesia or Bali or someplace?
I did not, but I worked for years with Larry Reed, who spent 20 years in Bali, and I studied his puppets, and I made copies of his puppets and tried to learn everything I could.
Because your mechanisms are amazing.
Well, thank you, Rachel.
I would agree, and part of the cool parts is, like, if you watch the film, Wendy goes an extra mile by trying to hide the rods within the shape of the puppet, and that's not particularly common. A lot of, like, Richard Bradshaw has his rods come off the back, and you can still see sort of shadows of the rods too, which is fine. But to go the extra mile and to be able to hide the mechanisms of the rods. Here's a little example of that too. Here's the Littlest Dragon. It's that exact same mechanism, only it's a tiny version. Wendy, what was this guy, like maybe 7 inches long? He was. Yeah,
that's about right. I mean, a little longer with the tail, maybe.
Yeah, and so the exact same body segments, the front on the rod, the middle rodless, and then the back on the rod, and you just get that great little sort of almost gallop going up the mountain. It's, I don't know. It's just
because there were so many puppets to make for this show. I really challenged myself to make efficient mechanisms and try and do things like a secondary movement where you pull a string, it just doesn't pull one thing. It actually is moving more than one thing. And this guy, who was carried by a character, is really just one string pull here, but you can only bend so far, so you can get a lot of lively movement out of him. And then it's hard to see everything, but it's also moving his tail just a little bit so that it gives it life.
Are those rubber bands that are stopping the head Well, yeah. Here's
Yeah.
that guy in action with the character Elizabeth holding him. So she's both
Oh,
performing as Elizabeth with the head mask, and that's the dragon moving.
hmm.
That Wendy was just showing. Raven, you're the best, man. I love you to death. I'm really glad you get to join us here for a little while. I understand you're in England right now, and I know it's like
Yeah,
2
bit
a.m. or
late.
something.
No, it's not that late, but it's pretty late.
We're glad to have you. We're going to bring on a few of the other puppeteers, and but it was really good to see you.
All right, good to see you.
Thank
as
you,
well.
Raven.
All
right.
right. Take
Soon.
care.
Bye. So let's bring on some of the other puppeteers, and we'll talk a little bit about the rehearsal process and shooting. So I'm going to do this cute little singer, and then we'll bring on our puppeteer. All right, let me introduce to you Russ Tucker, puppeteer extraordinaire, Mary Gregan, a fabulous puppeteer, and Kate Artaby, also a fabulous puppeteer. Welcome, all y'all. Glad to have you here with us.
Hi.
Glad to be here.
So, Kate, you came on to the project once we got to the East Coast. Is that right? So you had to play super catch up to get ready for the shoot. Am I remembering that correctly? Kate, can you hear?
you?
I don't think she can hear me. Mary, how you doing?
Hi. Sorry, I just cut out. I can hear you now.
Okay, good. I was saying that you came into the project when we took everything over to the East Coast to prepare for the shoot. Is that correct?
Yeah, she was working on another
Yeah.
project.
Yeah, I joined the team in Boston. Yeah, what was I working on? Oh, I remember.
Basil, right?
Basil Twist.
Oh, that's right. You were working with Basil Twist.
Yeah.
I
Right.
am really surprised. I was, yeah.
Yeah, and then Russ, you and Mary both flew out to California to rehearse with us. In that, was it a church? Is that what it was? Wendy?
Yes, it actually was this gorgeous Julia Morgan church that's nearby and was available to be rented out. So we had that and did our rehearsals in there and brought everybody in from the East Coast that was on the East Coast and worked out all of the choreography. So yeah, I just love to hear the puppeteers' response to that because nobody just played the dragon through the whole show, or Elizabeth. Everybody had to switch off, do more than one thing, sometimes operate a light, sometimes people were crawling on the floor.
Yeah.
And keep track of all of that. So just be fun to hear from you about what you did and how you worked it out.
Why don't we start with Russ? Russ, what was your experience like?
Well, it's kind of what Wendy said. It was kind of an egoless performance because nobody really did any one thing. You set up whatever the first image is. You get people to, you're on puppet, you're on light, you're on this, and then all right, we know we have to go to this next image. Who's free right now to get prepped, and then who has to move? And then there's always going to be problems where we don't have enough hands. Oh, what if I slide under the table? What if I jump over this? What if I something weird is, you're doing a character, but to make the show work, you have to give that character to someone else. So your hands are freed up.
Yeah.
But, the audience doesn't see any of that. That's the fun. That's the magic of it, that there's so much going on backstage. Hi, kid. There's so much going on backstage that the audience doesn't see, and they don't have to see. It's it's our job to get them sucked into the story, sucked into the images.
I think you and I shared the dragon back and forth quite a bit too,
Yes.
like especially the little guy. And I remember watching how you would work with it and trying to, because like I would come up with something and then you would come up with something else, and then it would be this sort of trade-off back and forth of sort of co-developing a character to sort of keep the movement consistent. And as I'm walking through or watching through the film, I can't tell whether it's you or it's me. There's parts that I remember as me, but because there was such a neat co-creation of the character itself, it was really cool to be involved in that.
I think part of that was only due to the fact that we had so long to rehearse. Like we had ample time to rehearse, and as you said earlier, because we had the puppets in our hands, most of it from day one, that we got to explore.
That's not a common thing as puppeteers, right? I mean, I'm not the only one that's experienced that horrible. Yeah. Mary, what was your experience like? We had three overhead projectors. We had six light sources. And so I know you were bouncing all over the place. What was your experience like?
Yeah, I was actually, when I re-watched the video, I remembered this particular section being such an intense moment during the backstage performance, right? So it was right at the moment where Jay says, "No, Elizabeth will take me," and it goes from the overhead projector. Right. They go down the stairs, and then it goes straight to a handheld, and we're going through the forest, and then another an overhead comes up, and then it's the live performer with the dragon at the base of the mountain. And I remember that whole sequence being just like this, go 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 go, because there was no narration happening at that time. It was just like we had to tell the entire story of that traveling through the puppets and not through the storytelling. And that was I remember that particular. I could still remember okay, and go 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 go, and then we could take a breath, and then we just go 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 again. So
and that segment started in the courtroom, which was one scene, and then it goes to Kate on that little spiral staircase where she's pulling that while everyone else is throwing things around. In this picture here, you can see I think I'm lying down. Mark is over there. You can see Kate in the back beneath the puppet. That's just before we spin into that insane scene of craziness. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Good. All right, you guys, we're running a little short on time. So I'm going to thank you guys for hanging out. We're going to have a Q&A if we have enough time at the end. So if you guys wouldn't mind hanging out with us for just a little bit, and we can talk. But it's just so good to see you guys here.
So good to see you guys.
Love you.
Love you too.
Bye.
All right, Wendy. I'm really excited to talk to this guy. We all knew him during the shoot as Newbar.
Yay!
So I'm gonna read a little fluff piece about him because he's just an incredible guy. So Newbar was the director of photography for this production, and is still the director of photography, and is still a photographer for magazines and corporations. He worked for the Bose Corporation for several years, and he's currently the founder and the president of Walker Creek Media, a company that is creating amazing documentaries and other films. And so welcome, please, Newbar Alexanian. Hi, Newbar. How are you,
Hi,
sir?
guys. Isn't this fun? Wow.
This is such a treat.
It's great. Yeah, it is great. I was just listening to all you talk about the characters and the puppets, and I just wanted, before I forget, say that is when I was trying to figure out how I was going to shoot this. There are sort of the obvious, large-scale decisions, but then when I first saw how many sizes of the dragon there were, I thought, oh my gosh, what are we going to do here? And then I saw a rehearsal, and then the second thing I saw was that really kind of flipped me out a little bit, which was there was no one character that was the dragon. And so I had to just kind of let go of that. I'm like, okay, so I'm just going to focus on the dragon, not who's working the dragon. And those things were really, so I had to let go of a lot of things that I would normally, the approaches that I would normally have, because so many people were doing so many things on both sides of the screen.
So I would imagine too. Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine too, since the shadow lights that I'm going to put up a little picture of you holding the teeny little jester puppet, which was one of my favorite puppets in the entire show. I would imagine too, because we were using such high powered lights, that the contrast between the light and the dark had to be a real challenge for the director of photography. How did you deal with that?
Well, I mean, we could scale that pretty. It wasn't actually that bad. We were shooting very high def, and so I didn't see that was just a technical problem, and I gave that to the person who does our lighting. to help, sort of boost a little bit of light into the shadows that were a little bit heavy. But overall, if you look, there's a way to look at this. First of all, I've worked with Bob Petrucci for, I don't know, 35 years, I think, maybe longer. We worked. He's an incredible person to work with. I mean, he imagines these things, and then we puts them together, and then we just produce these incredible pieces, as you're all talking about. But for me, I had to tell the story that included the whole notion of communication. And the screen, there are two sides to that screen, and there's communication going on both sides of that screen. And that was my focus. So you can see, if you look at the piece now and you think about communication, you can see how there's communication going on everywhere. So there's this one shot, which I don't know that is in this piece, where I'm tracking down the camera as I'm on a track on the right-hand side of the screen. And there's a moment where the camera goes by the edge of the screen and you see what's behind the screen. And that's a shot that was really important to Bob. And I understood why, because that is the essence of communication right there.
I have that scene right here. You want to take a quick look at it?
Yeah.
Here it is. So it goes from this, and this is the dolly shot right there.
Right. Yep. There it is. Yes, all of that.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
let's bring Bob back in because hi Bob.
Hi.
Hi Bob.
This film, what you guys came up with for this, it really had 5 elements. So there was the story, of course. There was the music, which is an element we haven't had really a lot of time to talk about. There were the shadows, and there was the storyteller, Jay, and then there was the children. And those 5 elements for me just made this film. So is that what you guys were thinking about, or like what was in consideration for you when you were putting this entire thing together?
Well, I guess we hadn't talked much about the music, and unfortunately Steve passed away and can't be here to talk about it in his amazing way. But he was one of the main drivers of the show from the beginning. We started with Jay's story, which was simply a voice, and then he keyed off of the magic flute theme, which Jay invented, and developed that into a number of variations and music cues to carry the show. And then he recruited the live musicians, and he prepared the compact disc, which interlaced Jay's storytelling and the music so that you guys could practice to that.
Yeah.
Mentioning the children, I think it maybe is important to talk about how we decided to shoot the entire show. In other words, we were looking, and if you see the Bose show that this material was used in, we excerpted about 60 seconds of it for the opening of the show, and it works great. They're wonderful highlights. And often when you're doing a commercial work, you might just say, we got to get some kid actors and we'll have them act surprised or act frightened or whatever. And that would be phony. What we needed was genuine feelings. And so that's why we invested in all the rehearsal time that you guys had mentioned. And then we shot the show many times. Newbar did all the photography with one camera. If you look at it today, it looks like it's a multi-camera shoot. That is because we shot it
how many times?
Five or 6 times.
Do we have 5 different audiences? Is that right?
I think we had 4 different audiences, and a couple of them we showed it to them twice, and they were very delighted to see it twice.
Right.
But then everything is genuine, everything is real, and that comes, really comes through, I think.
Absolutely. Good.
And the other thing I would say is that in addition to the kids being authentic, the puppets were authentic in the sense of, the dragon could have a real feeling. It looks like he's having a feeling, and it looks like, oops, my screen went. and that's true about, even, a lot of the other puppets, they all have their moments, and those moments come together really well. And the trick for me is I have to be there at the right time always. I had plenty of time to do that. So there's feeling is really, the emotional piece is really, really important.
And it was for the Bose Corporation. So if I'm remembering correctly, you guys had like 50 mics all over the little watch factory we were in. I think it wasn't 50, but it was a lot, right?
You had to be really careful about whispering, gossiping, or complaining, because there was always a microphone a couple feet away from you wherever you were, backstage or on stage.
Yeah, the Bose engineers, they're amazing. I mean, they're very great.
It was a surround sound soundtrack originally in the show, and so we needed mics everywhere.
Excellent. So we've got some time for some questions. So Bob Newmar, I'm going to send you to the green room, and then we're going to see if anyone has any questions. So if you've got questions, you can type them. If you're following us on YouTube, you can type your question in there. If you're following us on Facebook, you can certainly type in your question there. Pam has a question. How do I make a donation? Oh, Pam, what a great transition. Thank you.
I'm going to turn off my air conditioner.
Excellent. All right. So if you want to make a donation to the Direct Relief Fund for Puppet Artists, you can donate at that website. That's right below, and you can and we hope you do, and we can match it. And let's see, looking for some questions here. I have while we're waiting for some questions, I do have another question for Bob. So Bob, I'm going to bring you back on. So Bob, you went from the flamenco dancers to the shadow puppets. What followed? You had a few years still at Bose after that. What followed? Was the shadow puppets the peak, or?
Well, for puppetry, it certainly was.
All right.
But we tried to top ourselves in flamenco, and I think we did, and that was a Steve Ruggieri masterpiece. He worked a year with a rising star flamenco guitarist and composer from Jerez in Andalusia, and developed enough music to do an entire flamenco show, a whole lot of pieces, and he and our folks that we were working with in Spain recruited the musicians, we recruited dancers. In other words, we put together our own performing troupe. And we looked for the longest time for a good location to shoot in and couldn't find one. So we eventually designed a set that looked like the interior of a flamenco club and shot it on a soundstage in Madrid. An entire show. And we had 100 people in the audience. Not little kids, and we couldn't afford to keep we couldn't afford 500. We couldn't afford to change the audience like we did with the puppets, and I was kind of worried about that in the beginning. But what happened was that the artists and the audience, the actors in the audience, bonded over time and just became like one family. And the audience was present for 5 shows, 45-minute shows. And at the end of the last show, Steve came out, and the audience it's after the curtain calls, but the audience is still clapping. Steve came out with a bouquet of roses for all of the performers, both the men and the women, gave them all the bouquets, hugged them all, and then they all walked off stage. And the next thing we heard was the whole audience saying cinco más, meaning 5 more.
Wow.
So it was a wonderful experience, and it was, unfortunately, Steve had such great plans for what we were going to do in the succeeding years, but he had a stroke just about a month after that. And
what a loss.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
And would you wait before I wanted to ask, how was the film used after it was completed?
The Little Dragon.
Well, the whole show, the way it exists, has not really been used. I think I sent you a couple of weeks ago when we started organizing this thing. I sent you how pieces of it were cut to open the Bose show, and that's how it was used. And it was used in 2 different Bose shows with different cuts, and so it had those highlights had a life of probably 6 or 7 years in Bose stores.
Nice.
And then wasn't it also, didn't people also receive a demo DVD?
Oh, yes.
With equipment? Yeah.
I don't
with the
think,
home theater or something?
we were working on that, but I don't think it ever was really fully implemented, that take-home project.
Gotcha. All right, thanks, Bob. Well, Lisa's got a question for Wendy. What material were the shadow puppets made of? Hi, Lisa. Thanks for being with us.
So you can certainly use all kinds of different materials, and I've tried so many different things. But for the show, it's a railroad board. It's very stiff. There's always a trade-off. The stiffer it is, the longer it'll last, but the harder it is to cut. And for the larger ones, of course, they have to be stiffer. You can get away with a lot more with the thinner ones.
Thank you.
And it's available at art stores, railroad board.
Railroad board. All right. Thank you, Lisa, for the question. Cindy, we got a question from you. Other than the overhead projectors, what were the light sources you primarily used? This is a really interesting question because nowadays, like 15 years after the shoot, it's all LEDs. They're super bright.
I'm so glad you asked that question because we had been using in our live shows 100-watt halogens that I built the lights. But for this, because it was being filmed and we needed a brighter screen, I had to build all new lights for it, and they were 300-watt 2-pin halogens that needed transformers. So this is to show you what they look like. It was just like a simple pie tin, and here's the socket that the 2-pin would have gone into. So it was difficult, and we, always had to sort of monitor them, and they're heavy. And this show did have a life after the filming. We did take it to Germany and tour it to the International Theater Shadow Theater Festival. And that was also challenging because their electricity is different. Of course, nowadays things are so much simpler because you can use an LED flashlight. And there's some really good ones out there. I just recommend you don't get the kind that cycles through with strobing, and that can be really frustrating experience if you're performing. But here's like just a little rechargeable flashlight LED that I have, and I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, it's a remarkably bright light. Yeah. So if only,
if only we had had those.
And the halogens were incredibly hot, so the puppeteers always had to be a little bit cautious about burning each other
and
themselves.
So bright that you had to be careful not to look in the direction of the light. And Art and I were always joking about that because he was always holding it up. What about this one? And I'd look right at it.
That was half the fun, I think. Michelle asked if the DVD is available for purchase of the show. I don't think it is. But I wish it was. Lee is asking, could you talk a little bit about how we use the overheads? And we've got about 2 minutes left, Wendy, so I'm going to let you take this question.
Okay. And so the overheads were mostly used for scenery or sometimes puppets that needed to be flat in order for gravity to work with them that way. So we did use them for like opening the stained glass windows, and here's Russ on one doing that spiraling vortex that Elizabeth falls down at the beginning of the show. So we also had to put little flaps over the lights so that we could open the flap and fade the lights in and out and interact them with each other.
And that's how we would do transitions from one to the other. We would try to open one exactly as we were closing the other, or bring a light up as we were closing the other. And it took a lot of coordination from from all of the puppeteers. You guys.
The problem is too, they're noisy and they do bleed a lot of light. So they have vents so that they stay cool, but then that also works against you, that it's harder to see what's on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also had to register the overheads. We had to put little registers so everything would always be in the same position over and over and over again. I'm sorry to cut us off, but it is 3:00. You guys, everyone, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our guests. Thank you to Bob Petrucci, Jay O'Callahan, Newbar. Thank you, Russ, Kate, Mary, Wendy. Thank you all for joining us.
Raven.
Out there for joining us. And Raven.
Please donate.
Yeah, don't forget to donate to the Puppeteer Relief Fund at Puppeteers of America, puppeteers.org. Thank you guys so much for spending some time with us today. Thank you, Bose, for putting on this, this amazing production. It was such a treat to be a part of. We'll see you all later.
Oh, Elizabeth, listen. It's the king and the court. They make fun of me every day. Better hide. Elizabeth jumped behind the curtain just as the door flew open. In came the king. Well, what are you? I'm a dragon, sire. Oh, I'm not sure what you are. You can't breathe fire.